Elon Tusk. And that's so. I think we're ready to start, right? Let's see where's Kyle. Is she hiding? Can you give us 2 seconds? When Kyle gets here, we'll start. Yeah, and even that, to make it look bigger, they broke it in two.
Really? Is that a new version?
This the hedge thing.
Oh yeah.
The hedge thing is two.
Two things, but we still only have one agenda item.
Right. Right. Okay. We're good? Okay, I'd like to welcome you all to the Planning Commission meeting of April 3rd, 2019. And let's all stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, let's have a roll call.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Fresco.
Here.
Vice Chair Lambert.
Here.
Commissioner Landris.
Here.
Commissioner McKinnon.
Present.
Commissioner Perry.
Here.
And Chair Fonda Bernardi.
Here. Okay, Director's Report.
Good evening, Commission. Coming up at the next meeting on April 17th, we have a pretty full agenda. We're bringing back the 21st and Virginia Avenue condo project, a new project at 1707 Cloverfield, which is a mixed-use housing project, a automobile dealership at 1802 Santa Monica Boulevard, that's a development review permit, and then also a conditional use permit at 2300 Wilshire for Trader Joe's. So that's all on the 17th. May 1st, we have fence wall hedge modification appeal. We also have a project at 3223 Wilshire. It's a mixed-use project where Oz is currently located. We have a CUP application at 1231 3rd Street Promenade for a gym use. And then also we're bringing discussion on Promenade 3.0 to show the Commission what progress we've made on that project. Coming up at City Council, April 23rd, they will have the discussion you're having tonight on the SRO uses. Also, the two housing projects that you saw a few months ago, 1921 Oceanfront Walk and 1828 Ocean Avenue. So those are both appealed to Council. And then that night, the Council will also hopefully endorse the Planning Commission's mission statement. May 14th, we have the Development Agreement Monitoring Report, and then also that night the Landmark Designation Tree Appeal at 1122 California Avenue. So that's the Planning Commission and Council for upcoming community meetings. The Pico Wellbeing Project Community Meeting, next workshop is April 6th, and then on the R1 standards, the wrap-up session on that is April 10th. And that concludes my report.
Okay, are there any questions?
Mario and I are both speaking on the 23rd on those appeals of the Ocean Walk and what have you. How can we get copies of the appeal itself? Is that with the City Council?
Probably in the staff report, but
We do have that. It's public record. We could provide a copy for anyone who requests
Okay,
it.
great, thank you.
We all have copies.
We do?
Can we?
Oh.
Can we all have copies? That'd be great.
So I have a couple of questions and a comment. Just listening to your agendas for the next two meetings, you've got too much material on there for one night. Now, we've had that problem before. So this meeting tonight's got one substantive item, and last time Commissioner Parry texted me, you were out of here in 32 minutes.
right, it's a new record.
And I probably could have even coped with that. You know. But there I was lying at home. But and then the previous two meetings went until 1:30 and 12:30. Could you possibly look at the agendas again? I mean, 2 or 3 DRPs on the same agenda are difficult, and also a hedge appeal. We've had hedge appeals before that go for hours. So there's that. On 26th in Virginia, or was it 21st in Virginia, we've already all had a letter from the Santa Monica Housing Council Now, I've tried to look into this. Do you know anything about that organisation? Allegedly, Mr. Harding represents it.
I don't,
It doesn't seem to exist anywhere.
Right.
I just wondered if you knew anything about it.
no.
So no one here knows anything about it. All right, there you go. Thank you.
In response to your first comment, though, I appreciate the concern, and we will try to balance the agendas better. I mean, sometimes it's applicant availability, sometimes there's streamlining act issues that we have to deal with, but we acknowledge that we haven't done a very good job of that in the last couple of months.
That's not my comment. I'm happy to be here till midnight, but there are nights when we don't have much on.
Right. Got it.
And every one of the commissioners has identified things that they'd like to have discussion items, which we could, for example, this evening have discussed. But on nights like this, when you look at it, you go, wow, 3 DRPs and a CUP at Trader Joe's, that could be a long night. A couple of Finch appeals and a CUP, and then Promenade 3.0 could take 2 hours by itself. And it just doesn't seem to make for an even balance.
Right. Understood.
Okay, any other questions for planning director? Okay, any announcements? Oh,
David, I understand that the garden project has been appealed. Is
Yes.
that right? Do you know when that's going to go to council?
It's coming up. Let me see. It is going. Yeah, May 28th.
Okay, end of the month. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Do we therefore need to agendize someone to represent the Planning Commission at that hearing?
I move that you be that person.
No, thanks. Please, no.
I'm happy to go.
We can agendize
Okay.
that for a,
Yeah.
for a future
We'll do
meeting.
it next time.
Okay.
actually, if we have a volunteer.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to go.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I'll be here, but I'm happy to go.
If you're- Do we need to have it on the agenda? Yeah, we should. We'll have it on an upcoming agenda, and then we'll designate one of you to go.
Yeah.
okay.
Even though Amy put her hat in the ring already.
Okay,
I have a question on that. I have a question on that point.
Yeah.
In the past, the commission has given the chair broad authority to select a representative to represent the commission in front of city council. And at least at that time, it was meant to be an ongoing arrangement. Do we need to do this on a case-by-case basis, or can we rely on that kind of blanket?
I think we need to look into that for you, but we can bring back that answer for you.
Thank you.
okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we need the approval of the minutes for March 20th. And Richard, you were the only one who was not there. So can I have a motion or any corrections that you might have?
I move approval.
Nina, sound like you had some thought.
Yeah, I wasn't there.
Oh, Richard.
Yeah, I wasn't there.
Oh,
My understanding is that you can still adopt the minutes even if you're not there, but the STOAs are the things that you can't vote on. Is that?
This is a story.
no, we're talking
about the
approval of the
minutes.
minutes. Yeah. Okay, we have had a motion, a second.
There's a question then, because if Nina's saying she wasn't there,
But she said she wasn't there
I
for,
wasn't there for 16, 18.
she wasn't there for 16, 18, not for the minutes of the 20th, March 20th.
Chair, can you hold on 1 second? Heidi, can you?
It's probably still better to abstain unless you'd actually reviewed the tape.
Great, thanks.
Okay. So we've had a motion that's moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any abstentions? Any nays? Okay, approved. Okay. So now we're on to Stanford Street, 1618 Stanford Street, which is a statement of official action. Are there any questions about it? Amy, you have a? No? Okay. Okay. So could I have a motion to approve statement of official action for
Moved.
Stanford?
Seconded.
Okay.
I just would like to, I believe that we had delayed this STOA because of some corrections that had to be made which I see have been made, but I just want to make sure, I just want to check in with staff to see if there were any issues in making those corrections that we should be aware of.
No, no issues.
Thanks.
Okay. So we have a motion second. I'd like to have a vote on this. Roll call. I guess this is a roll call vote. Voice vote? Okay. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any abstentions?
I abstain.
I abstain as well.
Okay. Okay. Any noes? Okay. Thing passes. Okay. We're on now to public hearings. And the first item is 8A, 634 21st Place. And
It's been continued.
oh, it's been continued, both of them. Oh, okay. That was not in my notes. Okay. Okay. So we're now down to item 9A, which is discussion regarding the potential interim amendments to the zoning ordinance related to single-term occupancy. And Ms. Tanamori, can you give us a presentation about this?
Good evening, Commissioners. This is a discussion item as outlined in your report. We are asking that this Commission review and discuss the proposals presented by staff and consider formulating a recommendation to Council on proposed interim zoning ordinance amendments addressing single-room occupancy housing. This is follow-up to March 26th, a hearing at Council where Council did adopt an urgency interim zoning ordinance to enact a temporary 45-day prohibition on single-room occupancy or SRO uses. For reference, the slide outlines how, for the purposes of the ordinance, what SRO housing relates to. That is, SRO housing and structures is defined by the ordinance. You have in your attachment A definitions of that. Residential units that may but are not required to have kitchens or bathroom facilities and are at least 150 but no more than 375 square feet in size. The ordinance that was before Council and that was adopted does exempt 100% affordable housing projects as defined by code, and also exempts specialized housing uses. In other words, supportive housing, transitional housing, and emergency shelters. Those are also provided. The definitions are provided in your attachment A. This ordinance is in effect until May 10th, 2019. In formulating the staff recommendations, we're asking Planning Commission to weigh in on that language, also provide feedback on the concepts in general, but also to consider, at the root of this issue, whether or not it's desirable to restructure the regulations for SRO housing, to distinguish between market rate SRO housing types and the others as outlined, the affordable and specialized housing uses. As outlined more fully in your staff report, both presented this evening and also in reference at the Council meeting, the guidance, the policy guidance that staff has been looking to is really focused on ensuring consistency with the LUCE and the downtown community plans, goals and policies, really focused on the desire to develop a range of quality housing options in the downtown and also citywide as a cornerstone to what we would consider a complete community. This variety of housing types would address affordability, both affordable and market rate, and those specialized uses. We're also looking through housing policy to create the development of units that serve a wide range of household sizes and income levels. We also present this proposal with consideration given to changing regional housing trends, as outlined in your report, and based on staff research on other jurisdictions, as well as in looking at just the housing development market in general. We do see a trend moving toward the development of a smaller average unit size, particularly in high-density metropolitan areas on the coasts, where those location factors really make a difference on the viability and the desirability of that smaller unit size. In looking at different ordinances and looking at our policy objectives, in light of these changing housing trends, we do look to strike a balance between the location, size of the units, and the amenities that are incorporated. Just to follow up on those key location factors, our research found, and we have certainly built that into our downtown community plan, is looking at how proximity to work, to school, to jobs, to those neighborhood amenities that are built into, in this case, the downtown. And of course, that access to transit, how that all creates a market for the smaller unit type. With that in mind, staff is also proposing this language as a way to refocus our discussion in light of those trends and in light of that policy guidance on how we factor in livability with respect to physical design and how amenities might be incorporated in these market rate SRO housing projects. So in terms of the overall objectives outlined in your report, most broadly was to set up a structure vis-a-vis the zoning ordinance to differentiate between market rate SRO housing types from those other types as specified, the affordable and specialized housing uses. Another objective is to create revised standards for the market rate SRO housing type, particularly as outlined in the report and in the policy objectives that I just discussed. Our objective is also to maintain, as outlined in the red line language, the current standards for SRO housing for the affordable and specialized uses. The current standards established in 9.31330, those would be remain in place for the non-market rate SRO housing types. So getting into, without showing red line language, that's still a work in progress, but in terms of concepts for the revised standards for special uses and activities, that's your 9.31330 section in the code. We're looking to create a separate subsection of that to address the market rate SRO housing types. And in terms of what those special standards would focus on, that would be the minimum unit size of 220 square feet, per the International Building Code's definition of efficiency dwelling unit. This particular SRO type needs to provide a bathroom, a kitchen, and a closet. There's a maximum 2 person occupancy unless an additional 100 square feet is provided per additional person. Additional revisions proposed by staff focus in on the enhanced common area requirements. Some of this is taking what is currently in the code and expanding on it, and also including a couple of new specifications. So in this case, we'd be proposing to increase the common area, the minimum common area allocated per unit, increasing ground floor amenity space from 200 square feet to 400 square feet. A new requirement would be to introduce tenant amenities on each floor. This would be areas specifically set aside and programmed and dedicated for those amenities, things that could be including things like a game room, a shared workspace, communal kitchens for tenants hosting events or doing other kinds of things outside of the kitchen that would be in the unit. Also fitness, those are examples. Recognizing that there's also generally requirements for open space, we did want to clarify that that outdoor space is a positive. We view that as an amenity, and there would be the opportunity to, for lack of a better word, double count some space on the roof, a roof deck, for instance, that meets code, that's required or allowed by other aspects of the municipal code. That could count for, swap out for one of the floors tenant amenity requirements if it's provided on the roof. Let's see. So just getting into a little more detail, again, I wanted to separate between what is maintaining current requirements out of the special standards. That's listed on the bottom where it says maintain current requirements. So those things are in the code today, and the items that are listed above, those are some additional just specifications to build on what I've already described. So just to clarify, in terms of looking at the current standards for SRO structures, some of the things that we are maintaining is that requirement for the closet, the 30-day tenancy minimum, the 30-day minimum tenancy requirement, the entrances and the minimum width of the units. Those are maintaining the same as currently codified, and the aspect of facility management would not change. Staff is also proposing a related amendment, just as an attempt to ensure consistency in terminology, specifically around the residential use classification. There's the term multiple unit dwelling and also multiple unit structure used, and they're used interchangeably in some instances, and we'd like to unify those terms together as outlined in your report. In terms of next steps, one other item that's separate but related, we wanted to just give you some thoughts on SRO housing in general. We are, as outlined in your report, looking at, under a separate effort, looking at the impact fees and how we might use the approach potentially that's modeled in the AHPP requirements to ensure that stated impacts are reduced. And we'll be taking a look at that vis-a-vis a fee study and or text amendment. It's come up as a discussion point as we've been looking at this issue. In terms of next steps, April 23rd, we are proposing that Council consider an emergency interim IZO to propose to consider these amendments that would go into effect following that discussion, if Council chooses to adopt it. And with that, that's a lot of information. The red line language is, at least in concept, included for you. Happy to answer some questions. I'm going to go back to my chair for that portion.
Can I suggest we take public testimony before
we
the
do
questions?
have public testimony as well.
Yeah, we have 2 chits, so we could do that. And
I just lost my place in line.
okay, Neil Brower, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Neil Brower of Jeffrey Mangels, Butler and Mitchell, representing WS Communities, the owner and developer of the 5 SRO projects downtown that we believe are the target, really, of the IZO and of the proposed amendments here. You have our letter. It sets our legal arguments up, and rather than belabor those here, I just want to talk about kind of basic notions of fairness and how it applies here to our clients' projects. The projects at issue here, 5 of them, were developed to the letter of the requirements that were in effect at the time that they were proposed. They requested no special consideration regarding, height, floor area, affordability. It was to the letter of the law. And what you're being asked to do now is to change those rules after the fact and to apply them retroactively. Now, we don't necessarily have a problem with the prospective application of these new requirements. We have a problem with them being applied to projects that we believe are deemed by state law to be able to be built according to the rules that were in effect at the time that those applications were submitted and were deemed complete by the city's departments. Now, the projects at issue here also only account for about 16% of the total number of units only in downtown. That's even setting aside the total number of units in the city as a whole. So we represent something like 361 units of the more than 2,100 units that are proposed. And to our knowledge, no other pending dwelling units include SROs. So there's really no cause, even if the city believes that there's the potential for an overconcentration, you can deal with that problem prospectively and not necessarily by changing the rules as they apply to our client. Thank you very much.
Okay. Questions?
Yes.
Nina.
No, mine was for staff.
Okay. Okay.
I have a question.
Richard.
So, Mr. Brower?
Yes.
Some of these properties, I have a very deficient memory, but weren't they part of a complicated swap with the city at some stage involving the fire station and properties?
I believe that's true for one of the properties, yes.
And wasn't it, my memory was that, and again, it was a 5 or 6 story building that was code compliant at that stage that was being proposed as part of what was going to happen down there. And there were provisions made for parking as well. This was all part of a complicated swap, right? And you weren't obviously the lawyer at that stage.
Correct. And the swap was different, though, from the development agreement, as I understand it, that resulted. So for the 5th Street property, and I believe that was mentioned in the staff report on the IZO before council last week.
We don't have that here with us.
Right. So there was one of the issues was that one of these SRO developments would occur on a property that was previously approved for another development with a higher number of affordable units, a different unit mix, and so forth. That project resulted from a 5-year development agreement process, and then even after the development agreement, a further 3 years passed for design review, plan check, and so forth. And during that time, the construction costs increased so dramatically that the project itself became just unbuildable. And so the new projects were proposed, frankly, because they wanted to reduce entitlement risk and just needed to get something built after having paid the carry costs for the land over the course of about 8 years. But the land swap didn't itself include any requirement to build any particular project.
So your client,
yes,
and I'm not really sure who your client is.
WS Communities.
Is that an offspring of NMS?
No. Oh, okay. I can't address that.
Okay. So what I'm trying to get at is, and I'm not sure why that gentleman's sitting in the front row now.
He's my client.
Oh, I see. So when the land swap took place, were there any requirements on the developer as part of that land swap?
None that I'm aware of.
Right. So, in fact, all of these properties that we're now talking about, that you've come here to talk to us about, all had previous agreements or permits to develop property on them. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. That's true for prior permits were for, I believe, one of those properties.
So tonight what your thesis is that you have applied legitimately under the code to build some buildings.
Correct.
And you're entitled to build those buildings.
Correct.
And we're not entitled, according to you, to pass any amendments to the zoning code.
Not correct. I think my position is that you are absolutely entitled to pass amendments to the zoning code. The issue is what state law says for the ability to build these particular projects according to the rules that were in effect at the time that the applications were submitted and complete.
So your 14 or 15-page letter and your appearance here this evening is just to preserve the entitlements of your client up until this moment?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Heidi? Yeah.
Just a quick thought for the commission on this, and you may have seen this during the council discussion, but what before you this evening is a policy discussion on potential interim zoning amendments. So this is not about any one particular project or projects. That is not before you this evening. So I just wanted to remind the council, remind the commission that that's what's happening. This is also not, the IZO did not have the effect of denying any one project. Any projects that were in process will be individually assessed and processed in compliance with all applicable laws. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Mr. Brower is, of course, welcome to come speak to you about anything he would like, but these individual projects are not before you this evening.
Thank you. Okay. John? Well, yeah,
I don't know.
I
don't know how we're doing it. Okay.
Yeah, we're still in public.
So I actually had a question for the prior speaker. I'm curious. I'm guessing you had a chance to look at the staff report.
Yes.
Perhaps I didn't, but I'm catching up now.
Fair enough.
I'm curious about your thought. Given your experience in representing developers who might be interested in building this type of housing, what your thoughts are on these proposed conditions.
I'm not sure that I can answer that as any. I think once these conditions exist, then developers will come in and build what they can in accordance with what these conditions are. But I can't. I'm not sure that I can answer specifically how it might affect perception. Certainly,
I'm not hearing you say that like this undermines the feasibility of a project. These additional standards.
You'd have to measure that according to any particular proposal. I couldn't speak on that as a general matter. I apologize.
Okay.
Did you have a question?
I'm done.
Okay. Hearing no other questions, Jerry Rubin, please.
Thank you very, very much. Commissioners, city staff, first. I just feel like I want to say how sad it is that we lost Beth Leader Pack and what a wonderful friend she was, a wonderful friend to many people, and a wonderful, dedicated person trying to make a better community and a better world. And I just wanted to say that. As far as this item, I mean, as the city attorney said, you're not dealing with that project, but I always seem to remember that if something was done previously, that's in. Grandparented in. If they did it in accordance with all the rules, and I can't debate that whether they did or not, but if they did, that's a separate thing. As far as the future, I'm a big fan of housing all over the city. Singles, 1 bedroom, 2, 3, a balanced approach. Lots of low income, affordable housing and regular housing, and I always felt it was important to go a little bit higher to make it easier to do those things. I had heard, and I apologize on not being up to speed on all the written aspects of everything, but I heard that some places aren't required even to have a bathroom, and it just seems hard to imagine people living somewhere without access to a bathroom. I could almost see that that's the most important thing. Kitchen's important, but not as important as a bathroom. Closet, hey. I remember living in a place and it was pretty small, but I liked the location at the time near Venice Beach. If people have a lifestyle and they want to live somewhere in a very small place, but I'd like to know what are the regulations. I think there needs to be requirements to have these kinds of things. Otherwise, what are we even talking about here? So I also want to know if just slipped my mind here right now. I apologize. Is there requirements about no smoking in any new unit, or is that already on the books? Seems like any new housing should be no smoking, mandatory. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that closes the public testimony. And now, Roxanne, there are some questions for you.
I have some. First of all, I want to thank you.
Leslie.
Thank you for you and Heidi for the work you've done in the past week. I know it was must have been frenetic because all this came to be last Tuesday night, and between then and now, you've done an amazing job. So thank you for that. I have a couple questions. I'm a bit confused. We really are not. We're talking about efficiency units, correct? The IBC definition of efficiency units. Are those interchangeable with SRO units?
It's going to depend on the way we've proposed to structure or restructure SRO housing, SRO structures, how we are trying to separate out two subcategories. The IBC is specific to the market rate.
I understand. So the affordable is more the SRO. Is that correct? So are we going to have a subset in the SRO section of the code that talks about efficiency units, which is what we're talking about here? Because they're larger, the minimum size is larger than an SRO. And an SRO does not have to have a kitchen, and we're saying that you do in this.
Correct.
So it's a subset of whatever we're talking about. The other question I have is, now is the parking that's applicable to SRO, which I think is like half a space a unit, is that going to be applicable still? You didn't talk about changing any parking requirements.
We are not proposing changes to the parking requirements.
Okay, and then by the way, after our conversation today, you won me over. So about design and amenities and what have you.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
You want me to explain?
Well, you just brought it up, and you had an offline discussion. So
It's a
quite useful
discussion item. It's not. She knows what I'm talking about.
Well, she does, but we don't.
Well, you
We're
will.
actually
You
technically
will when I
different.
discuss it. You will when I discuss
Don't make
it.
her say everything twice.
Yeah, no, we don't want to be here any longer than we have to be. In terms of the square footages for the common areas, what basis did you use for coming up with those?
Oh, my mic's on. Well, we took a look in looking at other ordinances, looking at research about overall unit size, and looking at common areas or tenant amenity spaces, and also thinking about the relationship between the minimum unit size and how the floor plates might be divided up. That was factored in. We're open if there is additional feedback on that, please provide it. That's based on our analysis of a variety of factors and looking at other
But given that most SRO buildings are assisted affordable housing, I would assume that would be the measure you use to come up with these numbers. Is that accurate? The common areas and affordable SRO units tend to be pretty generous. In not units, but the buildings themselves. Assisted affordable SRO housing tends to have a substantial amount of common area. I just wondered how you came up with the numbers, but you've explained it. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you again.
Okay.
Just to respond, you asked about the parking, but just to remind the commission, there are no parking requirements
For SRO?
So downtown, there's no parking
you're
at all.
absolutely right.
Right.
We're just saying we're not changing.
I forgot about that.
Right, but we would, these units could happen elsewhere, so
yes,
I think we'd want
so that'd be
have
different.
a parking standard.
I understand. The final question is, did you look at the San Francisco micro unit ordinance?
Yes.
Are they about the same size as what we're talking about here?
I don't have all my notes of the different cities that.
Just curious,
we
'cause I know
looked
they're
at.
very behind that.
I believe they're larger, if I'm recollecting.
I thought they were like 250 or something like that. But they probably have common areas like you're proposing as well. I don't know that for a fact. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Nina?
So in terms of density for these projects, we measure by FAR. But I was wondering if we're building these much smaller units, if we're actually, and they're also allowed to have 2 people, maybe even 3 if they're the bigger size, if we're going to end up having a lot more people in our floor area, and if that is part of how you balanced. Well, first answer the first question, then I'll ask you the other question.
Okay. Can you pose the question?
Will we end up with more bodies in these buildings because we can squeeze more into the units than in a typical family residential building in downtown?
I wouldn't say that we could determine that. It's going to depend on tenants who wants to move in.
But more bedrooms, for example? I mean, like if we have, 3 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms and so many 1 bedrooms, we have 42 bedrooms that roughly fit. And, if we want to add a 2 bedroom, we have to use 2 1 bedrooms. I mean, that's usually how it works. The math works out that we get roughly the same number of people that our density equation correlates to. There's a proportion. And I'm wondering if this is going to make more people in these buildings than we normally get.
We did not analyze this
don't know.
proposal in that manner. I think the number of folks who are living in a 3-bedroom versus a smaller unit, that it's a little bit up to an individual person by person rental arrangement, but also to looking at the housing trends. I think the idea that folks are living differently, I think, is changing the analysis, the more traditional density analysis that we would do based on the bedroom count. It's just different. That was not specifically looked at.
Okay, that makes sense. So then now this is because of the lateness of the report, but I just wanted to be reminded, is 10 square feet of open space per unit what we require for typical apartment buildings?
No, it's more than that.
It's more than that. So this is still a lot less. It was 4, but moving it up to 10, they're still getting less open space per unit than we require for bigger units.
We are taking this, that is correct, we are taking the standards, and the basis for this was looking at the standards for SRO structures as they exist today, primarily formulated around the traditional SRO type and trying to build off that. We are not reopening into the entire multi-unit. We're not looking at all the factors that go into a multi-unit development or unit.
So basically and that's just for the IZO that we're working on, but in theory, what if that were to pass, would we have an opportunity to look at this more closely? I mean, we usually belabor all of the increments and comparisons pretty carefully.
Yes, there would be an opportunity for that.
It just seemed, okay.
This is being proposed as interim. On an interim basis, what we would be proposing at council would be put forward as a recommendation on an interim basis. So we could talk about potentially talk about permanent changes.
And then my last question, you said that it was a separate thing that we're studying. So at this point, we're not considering, it's not on the table, but it will come up at some other point whether or not we can ask for affordable housing.
It's just it's a topic that's come up generally in the discussion of SRO housing, particularly as we delineate between market and non-market. I'll just say it that way.
Is there a reason why we're not doing it now?
Well, we wouldn't be putting it forward on April 23rd. We'd want to take a look. Because there would be some additional analysis that would be required in a short amount of time.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Sean?
So my first question is for Heidi, actually. My understanding of, and I'm not talking about procedural issues, and I'm not talking about any individual applications that may or may not be before the city. I just want to make that really clear. But there was a claim that was made in the letter from JMBM that cities are required to allow EDUs, efficiency dwelling units, and that they have to have a minimum of 150. I'm reading the Senate analysis from the adoption of the legislation of AB 352, which was the site for that claim, that says very explicitly local governments are not required to adopt ordinances allowing for efficiency units, and in the same paragraph makes clear that that cities are absolutely permitted to require the efficiency units to be 220 or other numbers. Is that your understanding as well? We are not required to permit efficiency units, and they can be 220 square feet.
Yes, it's permissive, not mandatory.
Okay. Both.
Both. Efficiency units in general and the square. So the building code requires the 220, and this language that Commissioner Landers is referring to allows cities to adopt ordinances that allow for efficiency units, and they also allow those requirements in the building code to be relaxed in two ways, and one is to reduce it to 150 square feet, right. And the other is if the government agency chooses, and the other is to not require the full kitchen and bathroom facilities.
Yes, but we do not. If we permit efficiency units, then we cannot restrict them in transit-rich areas, but we are not required to permit them in the first place.
I'm totally confused. I'm sorry, I just need to...
That's right, yeah.
My understanding from last Tuesday night and from my conversations with you was state law basically said that we cannot prohibit the development of SRO units.
So I apologize if this was not clear the first time. So if the city does choose to, so that's what the law is. So prior to 2018, it was just that permissive language. It said cities could adopt ordinances that allow for efficiency units, and by the way, you can make them smaller than the 220. What got added in 2018 was if you allow for these, then you cannot limit the number of units if it's within
so why
a half
are we
mile
here?
of the of a transit stop, and then it also provides that the city does have the ability to place ordinary zoning restrictions like the density, height, setbacks.
So if we eliminate, well, we wouldn't eliminate SRO housing because we want the affordable SRO housing. So does that open the door, and that means that we have to allow SRO housing? We have no choice.
If we permit it.
Well, we do
have to
permit it. We permit
Right.
affordable housing.
Right. But the argument's being made that we have to permit it, and I'm clarifying that, in fact, as a city, we do not have to permit it. We can choose to permit it, but if we permit it, there are limits on what can and
I
cannot
understand,
happen.
but clearly we want more step-up projects.
Yes.
And so
Right,
we
exactly.
are through the door.
Once we're through the
We're
looking
through the
glass.
door.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So then I have my other question has nothing to do with that, and that is that I noticed in the staff report that you were focused on essentially the land use issues, right? The size of the units, the size of the open space, those provisions, the forthcoming conversation on potential impact fees. But as we discussed a couple of meetings ago, right, there's an overlap here with the conversation about the nature of the tenancies themselves in those units. And so I'm wondering, as we discussed, what options this commission might have for recommending a requirement for longer-term tenancies, defining domicile or intended permanent residence, and requiring that all tenants make those buildings their permanent residence, and then also requiring that that the efficiency units or SROs, or what we're calling them, be rented at all times to natural persons, so as to avoid some of the problems that we've had with corporate housing. In other words, if we're going to have efficiency units, if we're going to, if there are going to be efficiency units, and there are a very strong case for them, as AB 352 makes clear, let's make sure that it's actually housing for people who need long-term housing. What tools do we have that we could be incorporating into our recommendations?
As a starter response, feel free to chime in. I think that those factors have been discussed by the council as a discussion. It's been raised here. At this point, staff is not looking at applying or exploring those kinds of regulations on one particular, and in this particular context of SRO housing. We believe that's a discussion, a much broader discussion to have, and not one that we would apply solely to the market rate SRO housing type as we're proposing to define it and regulate it here.
Okay. So my understanding is that in West Hollywood, for example, they've applied it solely to ADUs. Conceivably, we could make an argument that with certain housing types across the board, particularly maybe smaller housing types, there is a case to be made for ensuring long-term tenancies, if we're without singling out, say, efficiency units as opposed to ADUs, as opposed to some other kind. Is that something that, again, recognizing that you're developing an ordinance, as I said at the last meeting, I'm looking for tools that these are not conversations that can happen in isolation from one another. And so I think if we're moving forward, we need to move forward recognizing that we have some overlap, some policy overlap that needs to be explored. There's a question mark at the end of that.
I guess all I can say is reiterate that we recognize from a policy standpoint there may be some overlapping issues when it comes to housing and the ways people are living differently, and how we structure zoning regulations and land use classifications to address that. We are not prepared to take that broader discussion and focus it solely on this particular type we're proposing to regulate a little bit differently. And we will be bringing back for discussion in response to council feedback on the corporate housing / medium-term housing, the co-living concepts. We are working on that.
Okay, thank you. We can come back in discussion.
Okay, Jason.
From Commissioner Fresco's questions about process, I got the understanding that tonight you're asking for conceptual feedback from the commission that will inform what staff brings to City Council on regarding the IZO. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So the specific language that and the red line that we've been presented with, we're not being asked to comment on the details of that. That's just representing what the concept might look like. Is that right?
You may, in order to provide feedback to staff, if you'd like to focus in on some of the concept red lines that are presented, feel free to. I think these are pretty straightforward, so either way, if you focus it in concept or on a particular clause, we could certainly entertain that.
Okay, so do I understand correctly that staff is proposing in addition to 330, that 330 would stay, section 330 would stay as it is, and then there'd be a section 335 with the modifications that are in the staff report?
Conceptually, yes.
Okay.
That's how
so
it's presented.
I mean, obviously we received the staff report close to meeting time, end of the day yesterday. Just based on my first look, the way that it is set up raises questions of clarity on what 330 is applying to and what 335 is. 335 I think is pretty clear, but if I put 330 before 335, it's not clear to me how someone reading that would clearly understand that 330 is for affordable or specialty.
Thank you for that feedback. In an earlier iteration, I had them flipped. This is really just a structural issue, but we appreciate the feedback on making sure it's clear. Originally, the market rate language came first, but you know what? I appreciate that. We will make sure it's clear that there's preamble to make applicability clear.
All right, and so then back to procedure, the exact language that staff is going to propose beyond or after the IZO, that is what you would bring that to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission would issue its recommendation on the specific language on down the line. Is that correct?
For permanent?
Right, for the permanent.
Yes.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Amy?
Can I just ask a follow-up to that, and how far out does the permanent come? It doesn't have to be exact. I'm just trying to get a sense if it's like the permanent comes in 3 years or it comes in 6 months.
Well, an interim IZO can go up to 5 years. We're still, that topic is important and still under discussion.
Okay. Okay, so this is interim and it's citywide. It's not just downtown that we're talking about.
Correct.
Okay. Actually, let me start with this because I think it might be a little easier. Can you just clarify for me, I'm looking at page 5 under the revised standards for SRO structures. I'm sorry, I'm being thick on this. Under, at the bottom of the page, under the enhanced common areas, the second bullet, increase from 200 to 400 feet of interior ground floor entry area with requirement to be programmed with tenant amenities.
So the current regulations in place require a certain amount, and we're proposing to increase it specifically on the ground floor. There's a requirement. We're proposing to increase it.
Can you just clarify for me what it is? Because I think that's what I'm struggling with, because I can see the numbers, but I don't quite understand. So this is just common area on the ground floor?
That's correct. So the current regulations in effect today specify that at least 200 square feet an area of interior common space shall be provided to the ground floor. We're proposing to increase the existing requirement of 200 square feet at the ground floor to 400 square feet on the ground floor.
Okay. Doesn't say common, so maybe that, just to clarify. Why are we saying that these SROs have to have bathrooms and kitchens?
That's based on the International Building Code.
It's the efficiency unit issue.
Correct.
So it's not really an SRO, though, if it has a bathroom and a kitchen. I mean, you're referencing this standard, but I don't know. Can you speak more broadly than that? Can you go to concepts? Can you? Right, because I guess I'll just jump into some thoughts while you're thinking. Right, which is, I guess I think about SROs, we're kind of describing SROs as this traditional affordable housing model. And I think when we talk about that, we're thinking about restricted affordable housing. But I think, historically, SROs were a market rate form of affordable housing that kind of morphed into restricted units because, for example, in like downtown LA, right, those were all the buildings that got built by, bought by affordable housing developments and became restricted. So, I think this is an opportunity to kind of facilitate a unique housing option that, might be more affordable, and that we should consider that, right? I mean, I think, what we're coming up with here is like a micro unit. It's not an SRO. Is there an opportunity to kind of allow for even further flexibility by not requiring bathrooms or not requiring kitchens?
Do you want to wait for an answer, or do you have some other thoughts?
I don't know. Either way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly within the commission's purview to recommend that to City Council, and staff would consider that as we prepare for that meeting in terms of our recommendation. I think what we try to do is just think about, like, if we were to have these efficiency units at market rate, it seemed that, at least our way of thinking was that they should at least have a bathroom and a kitchen as part of the unit. But if the commission has a different thought on that or something else to contribute, then we would certainly take that forward to council.
Can I ask, Heidi, can I ask you a question? So, I guess, one idea is that this is kind of an experiment, right? Is it, is there an option for us to limit the number of buildings or limit the number of units? That maybe this goes to what Commissioner Landris was talking about.
Right. So that seems problematic under that state law provision. Okay. And I should say too that this provision is rather new. It's January 1st, 2018. So there isn't a court, as far as we can tell, hasn't really interpreted the boundaries of it so far. So we're kind of going with the language of the statute at the moment. So we don't have any legal challenges or court opinions on it. So, but it does appear that limiting the number of units or building, especially within a half a mile of transit, would be prohibited.
Okay. I think that's all I have for now. Thanks.
I just have a couple of questions regarding process. In order to provide our input to the council, we have to do something tonight, correct? And what we're doing tonight is recommendations. It's not an action of approving language or whatever. So it may be, there may not be consensus. There may be consensus, what have you. But it's really just recommendations, right?
Right.
Okay.
Nina, you're next.
Based on what Amy just said and all of the research you did into other ordinances from other cities that you don't have with you, do our market rate SROs that don't have bathrooms and kitchens in today's housing climate, which is pretty intense, are they actually more affordable market rate units, or do they end up climbing up to a studio apartment level price anyway?
Well, the term of affordability isn't, I mean, we're proposing this as in a market rate environment.
Right.
So
does the market make those less valuable, or is the housing crunch so intense that they end up being just as valuable as a typical studio apartment?
looking at those that do not have a kitchen and bath, that would be something that's looked, it's a slightly different kind of housing use based on the way we're analyzing all of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd say that's more akin to group residential. And so I think the factors and the affordability, the rates of rent are just different. We're looking at ones focused on the units that have kitchen and bath, kitchen appliances.
So they are
defined.
different. That's my question. Are they different? Is it really a much more affordable thing, even at market rate? Does the market make it more affordable?
Research indicates that yes,
Yes.
sometimes 20 or
Okay.
30%, but we're not basing this
20
market.
or 30% more
That's
affordable.
what some of the research
Okay.
from ULI comes out.
That's
and
what I
puts
wanted
forward.
to know.
But I want to just be clear that we're not, the framework around the market rate, SRO housing type is not related to affordability per se. That's not,
I'm not
we
asking
can't
that.
control that.
I wasn't asking if it was related to affordability. Unfortunately, that word has many definitions and applications. I was just curious if they were actually less expensive or if housing is in such great demand. Anyway, there were just a few other little things in the red line that in my quick review I was still a little confused about. Now I can't find it. But it said, oh yeah, about on-site management. Because originally these SROs, our SRO ordinance was contemplating these special applications for this kind of housing, was the on-site management based on that aspect of it and providing services for those special applications, or is it because all of these so-called programmed lobbies and shared spaces that you need? Why do we need on-site management for the market rate units? What's it for? I just want to understand why it's there.
Well, if that requirement, as it's currently structured in 330, for now we've carried that over and thinking about these program spaces. There are more of them. They're in different areas of the building. We're proposing on every floor. So the maintenance of that, and as an amenity space, we envision that would be managed more closely compared to.
So there would just be a higher level of higher wear and tear, if you will, if there's a shared kitchen so that people who live there can still have parties and cook big meals. There's going to need to be more staff on site to
No,
make
it's the
those
con-
spaces
that's-
useful.
that's the
Okay,
genesis
I
of the
just
concept.
wanted to make sure I wrap my head around the whole concept here. Okay, thank you.
So,
Sean.
Let me ask a specific question and then a general one. What I noticed is that when the staff recommendation broke up the two types, it ended up what falls through the cracks is actually student housing, because I don't see any special treatment for student housing unless I'm mistaken, and I'm raising that because I'm not particularly, as a policy matter, I'm not particularly interested in building fancy student housing. I'm more concerned about building affordable student housing, but frequently student housing isn't built with a deed restriction or affordability covenants. It's just cheaper housing. So I'm wondering whether there's what your thinking is on that.
With respect to what you're calling student housing, we believe that based on the code construction of our residential use classifications, that's akin to group residential, which is a different classification.
Which is a different classification. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I think to Commissioner Perry's point earlier, that's the kind of clarification that would be really helpful in a staff report when this moves forward, or in a in communication, because that is one of the uses that does come up as a matter of concern. I guess just listening to the conversation, what problem are we trying to solve?
Thanks for asking that. I think that's a good question. It's important to ask ourselves that. And I think based on looking at the reason for the pause has been outlined in your report, the report that went to council, but that pause is really to allow us in the context of some proposed new regulations to address the changing housing trends and how we're seeing a new type. It's not new in the marketplace, but we're seeing this resurgence of interest in looking at smaller units, but doing this in a fundamentally different way for a different audience, so to speak. I think that from a policy perspective, it's not necessarily a problem. It's an issue that we want to see if we can tackle to promote livability in the downtown citywide, and to factor that into our standards today.
Yeah. And I would just add that I think we're also following up on previous direction from City Council when we've had the discussion before about micro units, about unit mix in individual buildings.
Yeah.
It's been very clear that, at least at that time, Council wanted to see a mix, that they were okay with some micro units, but they didn't want an entire project that was just micro units. So that's why we felt it was really important to highlight this issue and bring it forward. If that sentiment has changed and it's not a problem, we're not necessarily saying there's a problem we need to address, but we're saying that, again, based on past policy, this type of project has been a concern.
My concern, the reason that I'm asking the question is that I think it's important for us to really know what problem we're trying to solve, so that we can test the proposed changes against that problem. In other words, will an increase in square footage solve that problem? Will more open space, will impact fees, whatever it is that we're looking at? That's why I asked the question about tenancies, because I think that both the state, the statewide housing crisis, both the state and the city have made it clear that we need to address housing affordability and accessibility, and we clearly need to do that by providing a range of housing options, right? On the other hand, I also look at what happened on 2nd Street when, all of that long, that SRO building is now has now left the housing market entirely. It was, everyone was evicted, the Ellis Act was implemented, and those are becoming small commercial offices, and that strikes me as a huge and extraordinary loss to our housing stock and to housing affordability. So my worry is that we not make changes that end up doing harm to the range of housing mixes that are available to people who are willing to, sort of price what they can get into. We need to house people. We need to house them urgently. And I've read in a number of articles about how people are, what the trade-offs are. Some people are willing to give up a bathroom. Some people are willing to give up a kitchen. So I'm asking that question in the sense it strikes me that as a city we have an interest in residents staying here. We have an interest in providing housing that is for people who need housing, not a temporary place to stay on a job, or more housing that becomes essentially a hotel in disguise. So my question is, how are these changes going to advance those policy outcomes and not inadvertently drive us away from housing rather than toward it? I'm not assuming one way or another, but that's what I'm struggling with.
Can I respond? We may be going into discussion here.
We are in discussion, yeah.
Let's be honest. Where were you?
Richard's after me.
Oh, I didn't see your name's not on there.
It's right there. He's at the top.
Oh.
Do I have to separate you again?
No, I just missed him. Sorry.
Okay, so
no, Richard,
please.
And then she can respond to me.
So I have a sequence of questions. Commissioner Lambert made some mention earlier on of typical affordable SROs or assisted living or whatever else. When we look at market rate, that's a whole other different category. So is it necessary to increase the amount of square footage in common spaces? That's my question to you. Because you've increased it from 4 to 10 and from 200 to 400. What made you think that that was a necessary thing, given that this is a unique building where we're squeezing every aspect of the living smaller? Why did you think you needed to do that?
Because in the separation of the two types of SRO housing, we believe that that is reflective of what folks are bringing, developers are bringing to the market. We'd like to, instead of making it potentially optional, to make it required. We think that that's a benefit for residents who choose to live in those buildings. We think it provides opportunities for interaction and to increase livability. That's why, as an offshoot of why we have open space requirements and other things that we do build into multi-unit structures or dwellings.
But I guess my question is, these are such a significantly different departure from what we've required, and they're so much smaller, and they're looking at a different aspect of the market. Maybe people don't need that.
The market research suggests that folks are looking for those spaces when they're looking as a trade-off. Again, as noted earlier in the presentation I made, there's a balance between looking at the location and meaning the neighborhood, what's out in the neighborhood. There's also a balance between looking at how big of a unit, I'm going to say I as a potential renter, do I want to live in? And it's a balance. I think we're seeing that they're balancing location, the neighborhood environment, looking at amenities in the building, and also looking at the overall size of the unit. It's sort of a different balance.
Well, it is a different balance because we've got...
This is our proposal.
Yes, but I'm really trying to drill down on why you made those proposals. We've got people who come to us, hotel developers, and they're telling us, for example, when the Miramar came, that they couldn't house people in less than, just wanting to say 650 square feet per hotel room. And if you look at the size of most hotel rooms these days, at anything above 3-4 stars, it's 350, 400. Certainly the smallest would be 250 square feet. And even for one night, that would be a jam, and you're proposing that people live in it. I also noticed in there somewhere along the line that you had the basic proposal of, I think, 250 for 2 people, but you could add a third for another 100 and a fourth for another 100. So in 450 square feet, you could have 4 people living in that space, which might get a little tight. But it also goes to Commissioner Nina's point. Wouldn't the density of people per building go up considerably? And the answer is yes, surely. It might not go up overall because the FARs of some of these buildings that we were looking at were providing for bigger units and more floors, but even in a single floor or a 2-floor building, if you can provide 4 people in 400 square feet, the density of people living in that space must be higher. So is there not perhaps a cut-off, if even for these very small units, that you wouldn't want 4 people in 400 square feet?
Maybe they're small.
What's that? Yes. I mean, it really is that movie where it would...
Malkovich.
Yeah, John Malkovich. Glad you've got that memory issue under control, because mine is just gone. Commissioner Anderson asked a good question. When an apartment or a living space doesn't have a kitchen or a bathroom, isn't it a boarding house? Because you've said that they have to have on-site management. That's a boarding house.
That's interesting.
And why, and further to her question, why in this day and age, when I can travel across the world without even talking to anybody, checking in, getting my seat on a plane, getting in a car, checking into a hotel, do I need to have people supervising me in my residence when I've chosen to live in a place in downtown Santa Monica? What's that?
We need to clean up after you.
Of course. Multiple people need to do that. That's why you're all here.
We certainly welcome the feedback if you believe that's not a requirement that's necessary.
Well, I'm again trying to ask the question because if it's a boarding house and there's no kitchen and no bathroom, I understand the rationale, but if you're proposing a bathroom and a kitchen, even if there are 4 people living in that 400 square feet, so you take out the kitchen and you take out the bathroom, that's pretty tight. These are rooms that are smaller than most of the hotels will be putting in around town. And then you say, but we need to have on-site management. I'm not quite understanding the trade-offs that you made through here. Not criticising, just asking the questions.
In response to Commissioner Fresco's question, we started with the framework of what regulations exist. We thought about how that might be applicable or useful in this market rate context. We thought about how all of those amenity spaces are managed and maintained. It's a different kind of space. We're requiring, at least in the concept, that they be programmed for us. It's not just some, a room sitting there. It has to be managed and maintained. That's our idea and concept. That's the requirement.
Although they are market rate. Now, let's just go to the question of parking. So parking is not required in the downtown, but we do have 2 other train stations. If we are, in fact, looking at some version of this unit being put in place across the city, why wouldn't we abandon the parking requirement if they're within, whatever it is, 800 yards of the train stations at Bergamot and Mid-City? Because the suggestion would be that someone would be looking for this, specifically this kind of accommodation based on its price. We would ban them from having cars if they take this up. But that would be another version of what we're looking at if we're trying to drive the price down. If we're going to embrace this, and it does appear that if we have any semblance of opening for SROs or efficiency in our zoning code, we have to allow them around the train stations or within half a mile of transit.
Right.
That's what AB 352.
No, exactly. I'm not debating that. We're actually not discussing whether or not we should have them. We're discussing what the rules are governing them going forward.
Yeah.
Right.
What is the urgency for this tonight, beyond the fact that 2 of the gentlemen sitting in the front row, the developer and the lawyer, have put 6 applications in and we've become concerned about them? I know the City Council's taking it up in April, but what is the actual concern? Because it seems to me in our discussion this evening, we've ranged that there's a multitude of issues here.
Well, I think that based on the issues that have come up around these different housing trends, that's the context. We were already operating under and in, and this did come up with the filings as explained in the council report. We want to take a pause and take a look at what's being proposed, how it relates to our standards, how we might want to improve those standards going forward. It's simply within that context.
I see. All right. Well, thank you. And there may be more issues as we go forward into our discussion.
Okay. Jason, please.
If I'm understanding it correctly, under state law, we don't have to allow SRO units, but if we do, we can't limit the number of them? Is that?
Yes, it's a prohibition against a limitation on the number of those units that are within a half mile of transit, public transit.
But within that area, the zoning code could not allow for SRO units. Is that right?
Well, the city could not allow for SRO units at all.
All right. Okay. So,
or efficiency units, SRO units, yes.
I mean, there clearly are reasons to try to get kind of all these variants of housing into our community. Those that have bathrooms, kitchens, those that don't. And I'm curious if staff considered something more along the lines of the DCP approach of looking for a mix of unit types within individual projects, where we basically would be guaranteeing that with each development we'd be getting some element of this kind of housing, but it wouldn't be the entirety of the project. Are these kinds of units compatible with within a project where you do have a mix of unit types? And is that something that staff considered in this short time frame that we've had to look at the question?
It is a topic, as noted in the council report, that was broadly under consideration. We looked at a variety of factors, a variety of permutations. We also evaluated state law, and at this time, based on state law, a unit mix is not being recommended or proposed, nor a limit on the number of units.
Well, what is the state law dynamic that suggests that we shouldn't be looking at that?
I think it's AB 352. You can't limit the number of those units within the transit, and there's legislative history that suggests that unit mix was specifically contemplated.
I see. So even though there wouldn't be a limit on how many units there could be in the area, if it's a project by project limitation. Got it. Thank you.
Could I just follow up on that specific point? So is the size being proposed 250 feet as the minimum a way of limiting the number of units?
No.
You don't know that?
No, it was based on the International Building Code,
which is referenced through AB 352.
But why is that such a key element? If what you're saying is this is what we're trying to do, which is to provide unit mix. Now look, I'm not that keen on small units. These are my earlier questions about hotel rooms being small, but you picked a number. You've said it comes from this building. That will limit the number of units. Are there other places in California where they've picked another number?
The size could go down as low as 150.
Leslie's back.
Leslie, you're on.
Just in time. I just have a suggestion that we remember this is an interim ordinance and that we're going to have a lot of time to discuss a permanent ordinance, and that when we get to the discussion point, that the chair go one by one in terms of what kind of recommendation we think we should make to the city council. We've done that before.
Yeah, but that's not a good idea because Commissioner Anderson might raise a point that we want to comment on and go backwards and forwards. Surely that's
we'll
what
be here until
discussions...
midnight if that happens.
That's okay. You've got
It's
something
not
else
okay.
to do.
This is a preliminary.
Okay.
Well, I'm
Okay, it's an idea. It's an idea. It's a working thought. Let's keep that. Now it's Amy's turn, please.
Too many buttons to push. Again, maybe a follow-up to one of the commissioners over there. I mean, are there other ideas? I guess I'm realizing. So I'm reading this article about. I'm reading a really interesting article. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, there is a model like this in San Francisco right now. This developer called Star City has built. They I don't want to call it what they're calling it, but it's basically an SRO, right? There's units that don't have a bathroom, that don't have a kitchen, and they have they share those amenities. Are there other ideas besides what you presented to us in the staff report that you might want to share with us that are other ideas for us to consider? I mean, I guess I'm just feeling like this is an important topic. There are lots of models out there being tested and tried out, and I don't feel like, and I think because we're in this tight time frame, right, we're being presented with a specific proposal rather than a range of ideas for us to consider. And I get why that is, and I agree with Commissioner Lambert that this is interim, but I guess you did a lot of research this week. Are there other ideas that you think we might benefit from considering?
The research has been ongoing. However, I agree there are different models, and there's a lot of different examples out there, and those are being evaluated and looked at within our own local Santa Monica policy context, of course. We do believe there is a discussion to be had about what we consider what's being called out. The Star City example is the co-living community. That's the term. Looking at San Jose, there's a lot of new ordinances coming out too that we think are promising or interesting to look at based on, I will say that we have not envisioned revolutionizing the residential use classifications that we have that are embedded in our code, that there's a history for how this has come to be. This was passed, the structure was created in 2015. This is a pretty narrow, within that broader context, this is a pretty narrow and focused proposal, carving out one particular subtype. But to your question about other models, we are working on analysis to bring forward, talking specifically about the Star City co-living example that you're reading about.
Can I respond? I've done a fair amount of research on co-housing, not enough. There are as many models as you can think of how to do co-housing. I mean, there's everything from individual houses and a shared house to a boarding house to what we're talking about here. But the commonality is pretty universal, and that is common areas, generally a common kitchen, living area, and often sometimes a sort of governance, of the building in terms of, it's like a co-op, basically, although it's not a legal co-op, where there are rules of behavior and there are chores and what have you. That's not necessarily always the case, but the whole idea is it's a community. And co-housing is a community building model. And it's because, it's very, very popular now. It's all over the country. LA is actually jumping both feet into the co-housing business. I think it's too much to expect for us to come up tonight with a model that works. I mean, given how many there are, I think this is probably the best we can do because it really has all the elements of co-housing. Whether it has a bathroom or a kitchen, I would prefer it not have a kitchen. If you have a common kitchen, why would you have your own kitchen? Because it kind of defeats the purpose of the commonality. But that's something we could discuss. I just don't think we're going to find a perfect co-housing model tonight. Mayor Davis actually brought up the co-housing thing at the meeting last Tuesday, and it's just the beginning of looking at it. She wants the city to pursue a co-housing model that will go into the code, but we're just beginning.
So, thank you. I guess I would just once again take the opportunity to share my thoughts, which is I'm comfortable with everything that staff has proposed here, except that every unit has to have a bathroom and a kitchen. I think that we should allow for the development of these market rate SROs, which would mean that the bathrooms and the kitchens could be shared and don't have to be in a unit. Maybe one refinement to consider is that with the bathrooms, we set some kind of ratio, right? That there be at least one bathroom for every 3 units or every 2 units or something like that. I feel like staff is requiring that there be common space on every floor, and to me, that common space is that's the shared kitchen, right? That's why there's common space on every floor, is for the kitchen. Actually, I have one more question for staff. I apologize. There's not a regulation in here somewhere about staffing, right? We're not requiring any kind of. Where does it say that?
If you look at
10 units.
On-site manager. That's state law. Sorry, I was at my job today. I didn't have a chance to read this. So I'm sorry. It's showing up where?
It's on page 7.
I'm sorry. And that already exists, and it's state law that you have to have a property manager, right? We're not requiring anything different than state law, right? We're saying 10. That's fine.
Yeah, I believe it's 16.
Okay.
Jason?
Well, I will attempt a motion where we recommend to City Council that they move forward with the concept that staff has raised tonight, and that but that going forward, as it seems that they already are, that they continue their exploration into other co-housing models.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's have some discussion.
So, I guess I'm still, I mean, I appreciate the work that's being done here, but I'm not 100% convinced that it will address the issues that we're trying to address, particularly given what I'm hearing from a number of commissioners in terms of looking for more flexibility, and I think we should be more specific. I recognize that staff is going to bring its recommendation, but we're being asked to give the Planning Commission's recommendation. It sounds like there are commissioners who would like to see more flexibility in the code rather than less, and I would like to see, if this is a friendly amendment or however we want to phrase this, I would like to see some discussion. I recognize that these are not the same conversation. There's a separate conversation about co-housing, but if this is moving forward, I would like to recognize that this is an incomplete conversation until it incorporates, however staff wants to do it, questions about tenancy, domicile, and natural persons being tenants. And I would request that the Planning Commission frame that in its recommendation alongside any other suggestions regarding the flexibilities of the model. Again, recognizing that staff will present what it presents, I think it's important that we express ourselves. I don't know if that's friendly or not.
You want to put out the points?
Well, you're the maker and the seconder. Yeah.
Jason, you want to respond?
Well, I mean, I think if there's an exception to the length of tenancies, if that's what you're after in housing units, I think it would apply to units like this.
Right.
So, I mean, I'd like to hear what other commissioners have to say, but I would lean against incorporating that into the motion.
What about intended permanent residents, or requiring that they be leased to natural persons?
May I say something? I think we should wait to see what the corporate housing form is when it goes to City Council, and not put something in specific to this. Okay. I mean, they're going to do a citywide measure, regulation for corporate housing, and this should fall into that and should be defined in that.
Can we say that? Can we say that this?
Well, it's obvious.
Well, I think we should be explicit that these issues came up in our recommendation, that we're suggesting that these issues be revisited in light of corporate housing concerns. We don't have to. If you don't want to be specific, I understand that, but
I mean, I'd be happy, if it's fine with the seconder, to include a statement that we think that when council does consider these issues, that they specifically consider how it applies to SRO
Perfect.
and similar units.
That'd be great.
Fine.
Yeah? Okay.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we have an amended motion. Any discussion? Richard?
So at times over the last 8 or 9 years, we've gone backwards and forwards as a planning commission and as a city about what we want in the downtown, and we were highly concerned at one time that all we were getting was small units. And so we inserted into the regulations rules for bigger units and bigger mixes. But as time's gone by, I've also had some greater sympathy for smaller units under certain circumstances, particularly for seniors. It seems to make a lot of sense that as people's attention span shrinks, so should their requirements for living space. And what I think we're also looking at now are is inserting into our codes greater flexibility in the sort of living arrangements people are looking forward in the future, whether it's co-op housing that seems almost to spring from the experience people have at university, where they come out and they kind of look after each other, or they're housed together and then they don't mind that for an interim period afterwards. Others may want relatively small spaces, and the reason I drill down on the open space requirement is they may not be interested in that because they're going to live in the bars or the restaurants or their workspace where they go at 7 in the morning until midnight while they drive some new fabulous invention. But we've seen that, and we've seen that measure of people coming. Now, the real problem and fault line that we've got is, which was exemplified by the 6 applications, how do you devise a code that has both abilities in it, which is a mix of housing and people that you want to have long-term residents in your downtown area, and doesn't get overwhelmed by dozens of applications for really, really small units, so that you only get a monoculture that emerges. That's the problem that we're facing, and we really can't resolve it here this evening. Mm-hmm. What we can do is put really a temporary pause into the flood of applications as we look at how we expand the range of options in the downtown. And that's essentially what we're doing, and we're all raising different things. You're looking at more boarding house models, more cooperative models. I think there's an ability for small SROs with a kitchen and a bathroom as another version that sits side by side with the other 2 or 3 things. Some people might want that, as well as these bigger units and these family units. Resolving all this is going to be tough. There have been issues. People have carried land for such a long period of time that the construction costs have almost doubled in a number of cases, and so it made what was feasible is now infeasible. There probably was some sense of gaming the system. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It doesn't matter. Times have changed. So that's the downtown, but there's also elsewhere in the city, and we might want to create walkable communities in Bergamot of people who are focused on the sorts of jobs that are down there at the moment. So it really is interim. I don't think we want it to be a 5-year interim. We would be looking, I would think, no longer than a year interim. I don't know that you can guarantee that, but
we can't really guarantee that tonight, but I think the commission could include in its recommendation to council that it come back and
within a year,
some period of time.
That's a good idea.
Does anyone here feel uncomfortable with a 1-year turnaround?
That's a good idea.
And then I think the other thing is, of course...
Then could we add that to the...
well, is that friendly to the mover?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that we're also looking at this evening is that there's this divide between market rate, which is this new idea that's occurring, and the supported, affordable, assisted, all those other sorts of things that we've been used to. We possibly haven't had as many of them in the downtown as we would want, but we're also looking at these other 2 centres near the train stations to build communities as time goes on. So maybe that's also a wider issue, and the parking issue certainly comes into all of that. So yes, I'll support this evening, but I think it needs wider consideration and a lot more discussion and thought about what will look like. And the final thought is the market ultimately drives what gets built, and that's what we're seeing, that what we were discussing 5, 6, 7 years ago in the zoning ordinance, and even 4 years ago in the downtown community plan, has changed, and it'll change again as interest rates go up and people alter their plans and what they intend to do.
So we have a motion. It's been amended and I think shaped nicely. Is there anything else that people would like to add? So Nina, you're up.
You're actually up.
Oh, that's right.
I guess I just, I think I'm going to vote against this motion as close as it comes to, gaining my support, because I feel like we should be allowing for more flexibility. So I just want to show that before my vote.
Commissioner, have you heard the saying, the enemy of good is perfect? Because that's where I think you're at this evening, because you're always a person who's looking at new things and urging us to keep changing and so on. And here we have something that embraces it. and it doesn't go far enough, but it's only an interim thing, surely that's a step in the direction of what you want. I'm not putting you on the point on those.
And surely it's going to pass without my vote. So there.
Yeah, but that's no reason. We shouldn't step away from things that we believe in just because it's going to pass.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Perhaps
right.
you should look at your own voting record.
I'm comfortable with that.
Amy, would you like to add anything?
Would you like to step down there and we can have that discussion?
Out in the garage.
Okay.
I just wanted to say I will support the motion. I think that I think staff has actually done a good job in basing something that moves us forward on something we know without omitting the possibility as we move forward to really do the real research to get what we really want out of this. And so I think it's a stepping stone that I'm as comfortable with as I can be, having spent such a short amount of time with it, which I think is also parallel or proportional to the amount of time staff has spent with it as well. So I think this is as good as we can do, and I think it's adequate for the need.
Okay, I just have two things I want to say. One is funny and one is not. I support this motion. I think it's not perfect, but I think it's the best we can do given the time frame we have. I also the debate that Roxanne and I had this afternoon was alluded to. I'm sorry, because you were right. There's a sentence in all the staff reports on this SRO item that talks about community wellness and social connectedness and how it's mutually exclusive from what we're talking about here. And I just go crazy when I see that statement. Somehow it implies that people who live in SRO units or efficiency units they couldn't possibly be connected to the community. That's how I read it. And I take great offense to that. And then Roxanne explained it's not really the people, it's the environment they live in. And if they have communal space in the building, there's more community connectedness, and that's important. And that builds that community, and you're absolutely right. The second thing I wanted to share is a co-housing model that my daughter participated in. She went to Cal for 3.5 years. She lived in a student co-op. I'm going to say it. And one of those co-ops was a vegan clothing optional co-op. So that was a co-housing model that we may not want to repeat in Santa Monica. And what made her leave that co-op was
it's now in the motion, I understand.
Don't send your daughter to Cal. Was the rats in the building, and they were infesting the building. But in order to do something about the cats, you had to have a consensus of the entire building, and no one could agree to exterminate the rats. So the rats stayed on; they became permanent residents of the co-op, and my daughter left. But that's a co-housing model we may not want to emulate in Santa Monica.
All right, I'm going to keep my comments brief. One is I also want more flexibility, frankly. I think that's what I think a number of us are asking for, more flexibility, and I don't know if there's a way to encourage that in the motion. I don't know that it'll get Commissioner Anderson's vote, but I'm of the view that we need more flexibility, but I'll still vote for this. I do want to make the point, and I think this echoes what Commissioner Lambert just said. When we were at the 3rd Street Promenade 3.0 meeting, what we were told is that the 3rd Street Promenade is Santa Monica's living room. And if it is Santa Monica's living room, then I think what we're being asked to consider is that these are the bedrooms that go with that living room. And it speaks to this question of social connectedness and the way people, there's the Urban Land Institute did a long research report on this from the market perspective, but it did kind of highlight the extent to which people who are choosing these unit types are looking to be in proximity to a wide variety of amenities outside the physical building. And I think we do have to consider that when we're creating public space that is inviting and diverse and allows us to do all kinds of things in our lives without getting into a car, which is great, that there are going to be a subset of people who say, well, then if that's going to be my environment, the only thing I need to live is a bedroom and a bathroom, right? So we need to, I don't want us to become over determinative. I'd like to see us provide those options, but what I'd like to see is for those options to encourage long-term residency and the kind of social connectedness that comes with people moving here. You know, we're really talking about people in their, aside from, we're talking about seniors and we're talking about people in their 20s to early 30s, but looking at people making long-term commitments to Santa Monica at whatever stage of life they are. So I'll vote for it in that spirit.
Okay, I haven't said anything because I think we're ready to vote. So I will take my turn here. First of all, I want to thank the staff for introducing the idea of an increase in amenities, because even though you may be right, your room is your bedroom, it is nice to have a living room immediately off of the living room. So the increased, let's say, enlarged common areas are very important to any kind of flexible model, because right. In other words, these rooms are so small you can't even have a birthday party in your own apartment. So now what we save in rent, we're now giving to a restaurant or to another place because we just don't have the right thing. So I think the increased amenities are absolutely clear. And the other thing is, I'd like to say two things. One is, this feels a little bit like the airline industry 10 years ago. You know, well, we got to make more money, so we're going to charge you for your carry-on. We're going to charge you to make an advance reservation. And if you want to wear clothes, that's extra weight. We're going to charge you for that. That's how they got to Berkeley, right? So the point being that you can slice and dice this thing finer and finer, and we should not be involved in the, let's say, I'll call it the race to the bottom. We should set some bottom down there that no matter how flexible it is, we're not going to go below that. There are some things people should have, some minimum standards. So, for instance, I don't want to have the discussion now, but 150 square feet for a bedroom is pretty small. If it's your everything, your whole life has, where do you put your bicycle? You know, it's like when you get down to that level, it's... The other thing I will say, that when we miss, and we will miss whether by a mile or a mile, what's going to happen is these tiny little units are going to be joined back together in about 15 or 20 years, and you'll have one-bedroom units. So whatever we do today with those micro units, we should have the parking already calculated when those units are no longer very desirable in the marketplace and they start joining back together. You won't be able to do that if you've backed yourself into a parking corner. So I'd like to have that, let's say, kept in mind as we're moving forward. Other than that, I think we should take a vote on it. Let me ask the staff, do you feel like you have enough direction in all of our confused thoughts to have something, let's say, useful in going to the City Council? Do you need something else from us?
No, we will take all the comments and put them forward.
Okay. I wish you luck. Okay, let's take a vote. Okay, all those in favor of the motion as amended?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
I'm opposing. Were you? Okay.
Thank you for being the opposition. Any abstainers? Okay, hearing none, we move on. Future agenda items. I think we've been asked repeatedly to consider a discussion on the private tree issues and the link to the urban forest. And so I would like to entertain that as a possible future item, particularly as Earth Day is supposed to be creeping up on us somewhere. And I guess we just add that to our third Thursday of the month discussion when that might be introduced. And at the beginning, I think it should be a general discussion and not go to we're sculpting an ordinance, but just try to raise all the issues and how they might be dealt with. Anything else that people would want to add, Jason, to our agenda for the future?
No, that was it.
Okay, Richard.
Well, two things. First of all, I don't think you can have a private tree discussion without some discussion about what you would do, which would include potential legislation. Given the number of trees that are on private property, you have to have an outcome that you're looking at as well. So it can't just be a general discussion with the arborist here. Surely it has to be the avenues that we could look at so that we can get some progress moving forward. And the second thing is, I guess I repeatedly asked you where the mobility report from the mobility manager was, and again, My memory is completely hazy, but I thought you said it was going to be in March sometime, and here we are in April. So when do you think that's likely to now be on our agenda? Because it's a yearly reporting requirement under, I think, the bike plan and the pedestrian plan.
Yeah, I will get some feedback from Francie and let you know that.
Okay.
Jason?
Yep. And
I know you're waiting.
when's the next loose reporting period? Peter.
This was a gentleman with his name tag.
just
called
ran
Peter,
away.
who was just
Yeah.
left.
He just
Yeah,
left.
maybe he heard.
You knew that
Okay,
was
well,
coming.
I guess I'm putting the question
Yeah,
out there, and perhaps like in the manager's report
Right.
at the next meeting. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Sean?
I don't think we have public input. I have a recommendation for an adjournment, if we're there.
Okay. Yeah.
Are we there?
We're there as far as I'm
Okay,
concerned with
I
no
I would
other-
like to move, and I'll leave it to Commissioner Fresco to second and say a few words, but I would like to move that we adjourn in memory of Beth Leader Pack.
And with that in mind, do we know anything about a service for
Well,
her?
Nina will have.
I would like to second that. I knew Beth for, I guess I met her in 1997 originally, and I really cared for her a lot. I used to see her every time on my way here. I would always run into her in the sidewalk, and we'd have a quick hug, and then I'd rush in. So today was kind of a sad arrival. She was a really influential person in the city, and everywhere I go, I met almost nobody who doesn't know her or who hasn't been touched by her. It's really, for such a soft-spoken, low-key person, her impact was really vast, and she really stood strong and long for a lot of people who needed an advocate. And it was she was just a great contributor in our community. And she also wrote the original application to the Shotgun House. But that was the least of her many accomplishments. And she will be greatly missed, and she's a great loss.
Okay, so motion to adjourn, you've made that, seconded, so let's adjourn.